Story time with Gant. You know, I've always wondered why no one's gone out and made a documentary or a video documenting the entire history of AniTube and anime YouTubers in general. And then I realized, oh, it's because no one's been around as long as I have. Yeah, even if you wanted to make a video like that, I don't know how you'd go about making it when either there are no resources available or all of the information is locked in the head of someone like me. So you know, after realizing that, I thought, fine, I'll do it myself. This is the entire history of anime YouTube, as told by me. See, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then, anime YouTube began. And his name was Hards. See, a lot of people might wonder who the very first AniTuber was, since there's literally no documentation and hardly anyone talks about it, and all the videos talking about it are either non-existent or buried somewhere in the void of YouTube. Trust me, I've tried looking for it. So if you weren't around, you wouldn't have known that the very first AniTuber is a guy that goes by the name of Hards, who made a review show called Hards Anime Review. This is our founding father, our progenitor, and what did he do? He looked at a webcam and reviewed anime. He started all the way back in 2006, the very start of YouTube, and this was back in the day when anything went for YouTube content, and the quality we could expect was looking at a $5 webcam with bad angles and bad lighting, and just talking. Eventually Hards would start incorporating anime clips into his videos, but that would get him in trouble with the YouTube copyright system, so his original channel is not up there anymore, but eventually he would rebrand his review show into a new channel called Who's Your Anime, that then got rebranded again to a show called The Hard Mode, which I can never say unironically with a straight face. That channel is still up today, but unfortunately the progenitor of YouTube would upload a video on the 13th of February 2014 announcing his retirement. So Hards, for starting the entire landscape of anime YouTube, I bid you farewell, Captain. But before we move on, I wanted to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, ReFantasia Charm and Conquer. ReFantasia Charm and Conquer is a free-to-play mobile game where you take control of a reincarnated warrior. This is an isekai? That's right, you can live your best isekai life as Return to Fantasia brings you into a world of magic and might. Enter a world governed by superstition and fear, where you have to use your advanced scientific knowledge to conquer and reign supreme in this fantasy world. But sometimes, might isn't always the way. You can also win your followers with charisma and intellect by leveling up your heroes and train your troops automatically. But who says you need to rely on just yourself to conquer? Why not build an alliance with travelers to fight against your common enemy, establish closer ties with your allies through an intricate web of marriages through their heirs and heiresses, and use them to boost your empire. And don't forget about the best part of being an isekai. That's right, baby. You got the waifus. Elves, bestians, fairies, demons, and even goddesses. You've seen enough isekai to know how this goes down, and they're here right at your fingertips. So, what are you waiting for? Start your isekai journey today by clicking the link in the description and using the bonus code on screen for some freebies. Thank you to ReFantasia Charm and Conquer for sponsoring me today. Back to the video. After Hards would be Mr. Anime, who specifically started his channel in order to compete with Hards. You could see this in his very first video if his channel was actually still up. He would try to emulate Hards' video style but bring a higher quality of production to it. He had a better camera, better equipment, and he would often incorporate skits into his videos as well, so it wasn't just about the anime reviews. Some of these skits would include him playing around with a lot of guns. As one of the grandfathers of AniTube, he seemed like one of the few people who was actually aware and involved in the community. I remember he once made a video called The Face of Anime YouTube, where he would give a shout out to a bunch of other YouTubers on the platform that also talked about anime. And who was one of those lucky few? Me. Even if he couldn't pronounce my name to shit.
Next on the list is Gaigic, aka Anime Zone. And let me tell you, he is one hilarious British man.
You know, I owe a lot to Mr. Anime because he did give me my very first shout out, and as one of the biggest anime YouTubers on the platform at the time, it really helped me get a boost and helped me get my channel going when I just started, so he must be a swell guy. Foreshadowing is lovely, isn't it? But aside from Hards and Mr. Anime, which is very clearly the first and second AniTuber, they would spawn a new wave of content creators that would be, I guess, like the founding fathers of early AniTube. You had people like Grumpy G-San, Magus X1, and this new up-and-coming guy called the Anime Zone, aka Giguk, aka me. You know, I saw a lot of these other anime reviewers as just guys who sat in front of a webcam and talked and reviewed anime. And back then I thought, what if there was a review channel that didn't show your face and did some basic editing? And at the time I was a huge Zero Punctuation fan, so I thought, what if there was a Zero Punctuation but just for anime. And that's how I got started, by being a Windows Movie Maker version of Zero Punctuation. I can't remember every content creator that was around back then because it was a long fucking time ago and most of these people aren't active anymore. But I remember being the 4th or 5th or maybe definitely first 10 AniTubers on the platform. If there's one thing we all had in common though, was that all of our channels was focused solely around reviewing anime. We would take an anime, talk about it, review it, and give it like a 1 out of 5 stars or 1 out of 10 or whatever our rating system was back then. And that would set the stage for anime YouTube for a while, because after that you would have some more, let's say, polished content creators who entered the scene. There were people like Yezu Otaku or Arcade, aka Glass Reflection, aka Tristan, who came in and had these highly polished, highly edited anime reviews that kind of kicked all our asses. Like there was me using Windows Movie Maker and these still images or whatever, and then Tristan comes in and goes like, what is that peasant editing software? I'm using Sony Vegas. I think that's what Tristan was using back then. And back then I remember seeing their videos come up using actual anime clips that filled up the entire screen of YouTube, and I was just like, they are an editing god. They grew so quickly in the anime YouTube scene back then, and by so quickly, by the way, I mean they reached 1,000 subscribers really fast. That was kind of the benchmark of what a big AniTuber was back then. But with the highly edited clips came other problems, since YouTube went through this kind of DMCA apocalypse. See, this was the era where YouTube had a massive crackdown on copyrighted content on their platform because it was running amok. Wait, you're telling me Naruto episode 145 Spanish sub part 1 out of 3 is not fair use? What do you mean? The problem is that the system YouTube implemented made it impossible to tell what was actually copyrighted content and what was fair use. The result of that is that basically anything using anime clips got struck. And back then, if you got hit, there was nothing you could do about it. There was no counterclaim system, no @Team YouTube to get mad at. If your video was taken down, it was just gone. And if 3 were taken down, then bye-bye YouTube, you gotta start a new channel now. The result of this is that a lot of content creators just moved off of YouTube and started their own sites or uploaded to other video sharing platforms like Blip. You know, Arcade and Yezu Otaku started the D2 Brigade, and this was the era where everyone and their mother wanted to be a part of that guy with the glasses. But what this meant was that there was a massive gap on YouTube for anime reviews, which meant anyone who stayed could take a huge advantage of. Like me. Because you know what? You can't be copyright claimed for anime clips if your editing's just shit. Oh, you can use my shit editing would actually save me back then. This would be around the time when I was able to grow to be one of the top in the community just because there was zero competition. But then around that same time, a new group of creators would come along, which I like to call the spinny chair reviewers. Since you couldn't get away with showing clips for full anime reviews, a new trend would start where content creators would just, instead of reviewing entire anime, just review singular chapters, mostly of ongoing popular shonen at the time. This would be the start of the community of chapter reviewers. You had people like Forever World, Soy7 Mage, Code Provider, I know there's a bunch more, I just don't remember them off the top of my head. A lot of us anime reviewers like to call them spinny chairs because a lot of their content would be characterized by a guy staring in the camera, talking about the latest chapter, and it would always be in one of the office spinny chairs. I don't know why I find the term spinny chair so funny when I'm in a spinny chair right now. And that community also grew massively fast because us making anime reviews, we couldn't compete. I mean, they were talking about One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. Compared to us, that was just an infinite content glitch. But then around this time was when one of the most shocking incidents to ever occur in the community back then, and even to this day, happened. One day I woke up and found that Mr. Anime, aka Trey Sesler, one of the founding fathers of anime YouTube, had murdered his entire family. It was an absolutely shocking and horrific event, and a lot of us didn't know how to process or react to it. I mean, even now it's talked about in true crime channels. It's an event that exceeded just our small little community. But back then, it honestly felt like some distant relative just did this horrific act. The community back then was way smaller than it is now. Even if you didn't talk to everyone, you were at least aware of them. It really was just shocking to know that someone in our small community could do something this horrific. And it perplexed me even more knowing that this was the guy who helped me get my start on YouTube, and I'd personally messaged him a few times to thank him. I was in university at the time, and I think a lot of people were confused as to why I was just suddenly like really sad and shocked and depressed one day, and I didn't really quite know how to verbalize it, which is kind of why I made that like raw reaction video that gets played on every true crime video that covers this event. But I think the best thing I can say about it is what a fellow anime reviewer at the time said to me when he was processing it, where he said, "I'll never forget what Mr. Anime did for the community, but I'll never forgive Trey Sesler for the monster that he is." Alright, that was a depressing tangent. Back to the story. The next big thing to probably happen within our community was a bunch of anime reviewers came together to battle the spinny chairs. No, that's not why we did it. To create a podcast where we could just talk about anime and casually shoot shit and not have to script and write everything beforehand. And it was called Podtaku. Spoiler alert, I was part of that too. Anime podcasts had existed before on iTunes and other podcast platforms, but Podtaku was unique because it was basically the very first anime podcast that was uploaded to YouTube. And I know this for a fact because I remember suggesting it, because I remember there was a massive conversation about whether uploading an anime-only podcast could even work on a video platform like YouTube. Podtaku was something that I don't think was influential in the wider sphere of YouTube at all, but I think it was definitely influential in the anime YouTube community. Originally you had me, Tristan, Holden, and ex-Disturbed Jeans. Then we'd eventually start a side podcast called J-Taku and add more members, where you had people like Bakashift, aka Alan, aka my current editor, joining. I think what Podtaku represents was that this was the first time that the whole of AniTube felt like it was one big massive community. If you were making anime content back at the time, you probably knew about Podtaku in some way, shape or form. And like even to this day, looking at the views of Podtaku, even though it's dead now, it would still be a pretty successful anime podcast by today's standards. It kind of just shows how influential and big it was for our community back then. But nothing lasts forever, and eventually Podtaku would die. That's a story for a different video. And I think the death of Podtaku really cemented a shift in the type of content you'd seen in our community, because around the end of that era you'd see the rise of a new form of anime content: anime analysis or video essay content. This is why you had people like Digibro and Mother's Basement joining our community who would have a different approach when it came to anime content. See, anime content before was defined purely by anime reviews. We would take an anime show and then we would review it. But I think the YouTube audience started to get bored of that and crave something new, which is why I think anime review content kind of started to fall off. And then we saw the rise of people talking about anime through a more analytical lens. We would analyze one single aspect, one character, instead of just the entire show in general. And I don't think this was something that was exclusive to anime YouTube only, because YouTube in general was going through this massive video essay phase. So of course, as it always does, trends from the wider YouTube sphere will always trickle down into the anime YouTube community. Around here is about the time I've got to give a quick shout out to one of the most influential creators to ever grace our community: DOUCHEBAGCHOCOLAT, aka Demolition D. Demo was always an enigma in our community. He never got too much involved, but pretty much everyone around him knew who he was. If you have a favorite AniTuber, well, this was your favorite AniTuber's favorite AniTuber. And I gotta say, even from my perspective, Demo's content was years ahead of its time. He has influenced countless other smaller and bigger creators in our own community. And even though he's stopped making anime content, or as far as I can tell, YouTube content in general, you can still see his influence in our community today. You can tell he wasn't doing this for the money or the fame. He was just doing it because he just wants to make his kind of content and just not give a shit. Because I think with his death, disclaimer, I don't actually mean death, I just mean he stopped uploading to YouTube, it marked an era where you didn't just have to rely on passion to want to make anime content, but it started to become financially viable to make this your job. Around this time was when I quit YouTube for a bit, when I got my job at the BBC. You know, even as the AniTuber with the most subscribers at the time, I just thought that it wasn't sustainable to keep doing this, and there was no way that I could ever get paid to make this a stable job. But did some people come around in that time to prove me wrong. Enter Misty Cronexia, Joey the Anime Man, Aki Dearest, and Noble, aka Lost Paws. These four creators in general blew up in the anime sphere. And when I said blew up, I meant on a magnitude we had never even come close to seeing before. Remember when I said I quit AniTube when I was one of the most subscribed creators at the time? Well, I had around 100,000 subscribers. It had taken me 6 years to reach that subscriber number, and I thought after 6 years, I had reached the ceiling for our community and our audience. The 4 of them all got to 1 million. In like a year or two. I'm not sure if that's the exact time scale, I'm sure they can tell you more accurately, but it felt like that to me. See, I always thought that there just wasn't enough of an audience to be able to make anime YouTube your job. Or if it was, then you just have to be happy with like table scraps and not paying rent every month. What the 4 of them proved was that not only was there an audience there, but this could be a job, and a successful one as well. And I think part of that is to do with the fact that a lot of them were making a very different style of content. They weren't making anime reviews or anime analysis, but it was more anime vlogging, or YouTube content around the anime culture and audience in general, rather than specific anime shows. It was slightly surreal being on YouTube for so long and seeing such a massive growth spurt of audience that you just never thought existed before. But I think that mirrors just how quickly anime seems to grow in the West period. This was around the time you had mega hits like Attack on Titan and One Punch Man airing, so anime in general was just getting massively more popular than it ever had before, and I think that was reflected on YouTube as well. And you know, even though I'm friends with a lot of these creators, I just gotta say, thanks guys. Without you guys setting the new landscape and proving that there was an audience there and proving that this kind of attention and views was possible, I would never have come back to YouTube. They showed everyone that anime content on YouTube could be a job, and without someone doing that, I would have never have even known that this was a possible route that I could take. And that's why I came back. Well, that was 90% of the reason at least. The other 10% was, who the fuck are these kids on my turf? Let me show them how it's done. I'm gonna come take my crown back. I'm just fucking kidding. And yeah, because of that, anime YouTube started to stabilize for a while. You had some growing pains because suddenly people were making money out of that, and I remember like the early days, the audiences were just not happy. I remember back in the day when people opened a Patreon or people started putting sponsors on their videos, a big chunk of audiences would be like, huh, you've sold out. But eventually, more and more creators found a way to make this a sustainable job, whatever kind of anime content that they made. You know, you had people like SUPEREYEPATCHWOLF, who kind of like rose out of nowhere. Gaining 1 million subs was no longer a distant dream, but more like a milestone you expect the biggest anime YouTubers to get. We started being invited to anime conventions. We started being recognized by fans at anime conventions. We had an audience that we could not even comprehend when we first started doing anime YouTube. We weren't just a bunch of dudes sitting in our mother's basement, Jeff, anymore, but we were being taken seriously. And I think all of this has culminated into the next big project I would be involved in, which is of course Trash Taste. You know, if you've seen my previous video, you'd know the entire backstory about how Trash Taste was formed, so I'm not going to spend too much time in it. But to me, Trash Taste is the first time anything from the anime YouTube community grew outside into the wider YouTube community. Of course, Trash Taste was a podcast started by myself, Joey, and Connor, CDogVA. But within 1 year, its reach and influence had reached far past our tiny little community. Trash Taste was bigger than the 3 of us, and aside from the odd times, you know, fucking Joey collab with PewDiePie or something, it was the first time I felt like the wider YouTube community and the wider YouTube audience was aware of what was going on in anime YouTube. And I think that lit a fire with a lot of content creators in our community, because you saw a trend of big prominent anime YouTubers branching out to do different kinds of content with different communities. You had creators like Nuxtaku, who had blown up massively doing anime content, becoming more of a streamer slash meme personality kind of YouTuber. Connor, who at the time of starting Trash Taste had the smallest audience compared to me and Joey, blew up fucking massively, and now has pivoted towards doing more Japan content and streaming content. Same with Sydney or Sidsnap, who started making content around more adult focused anime and manga, and has now done a lot of content on Japan as well. But it's not just about anime YouTubers breaking out of the sphere, because now you see mainstream YouTubers like Charlie talk about anime. A lot of streamers and big YouTube personalities are publicly fans of anime. Anime content is no longer just being made by anime YouTubers, and I think that in general reflects how the current anime audience is. You know, the current new trend I've seen with the current landscape of anime YouTube is that Anime theories and explanation channels have really started to be on the rise in the past few years. You know, you still have some guys like SCAMBOLI Reviews making the OG type of anime analysis / review content and still growing very steadily and becoming prominent, but it's much rarer to see nowadays than it was before. Like the wider anime fandom itself, it's hard to group all anime fans in one community because now it is a collection of many communities. Some AniTubers I might not have even heard of right now or didn't mention in this video might be multitudes of times bigger than some of the most prominent figures of our community back in the day. Like I remember recently I was hanging out with OHARA Reviews, who is a One Piece content creator. Shout out to you, Emmanuel. He's someone who started doing anime content recently, and I remember having a conversation with him and it blew my mind how he had never heard of people like Demo or Digi back in the day. But I guess that just shows how our little community has grown way past the boundaries we thought it would grow. And yeah, that is the entire history of AniTube so far. From my perspective at least. I didn't mean to make this video be like a, haha, look at all the things I've been involved with, let me just suck my dick a bit more. Even if I am a JoJo fan. I'm genuinely just so surprised I've been able to stay relevant for this long when so many of my peers have stopped now. And I hope that one day when that eventually happens to me, someone's going to remember me in the same way. I'm sorry if you're an AniTuber and I didn't mention you or I've missed something because I'm literally just recalling everything off the top of my head. And I didn't even mention like the VTubing community, the abridging community, the AMV community, the cover artist community, the Utite community, or as I like to call them, the Utitties. This is just meant to be an old man on YouTube reminiscing on everything that's happened so far. Hopefully someone can take all of the information gathered here and actually make a coherent video with a bit more research and hopefully less bias than I've had. So, in summary, what is the AniTube community? A mistake.